Good morning. This is Fire Chief Ron Coleman. I'm standing in my library at my home in Sacramento, California, and I'm thinking about an idea that I'd like to share with you. And it has to do with the past and the present and the future of the American Fire Service. You know, we're a very proud profession. We got a lot of history that's going for us. Probably almost all of us have had an opportunity to read one or more history books of our occupation. This one happens to be one of the ones that I've scanned from time to time, called A History of the British Fire Service, that goes all the way back to the days of the London Fire Brigade and the 1880s. And there's also new history books that are being written. Here, for example, is Firefighters, done by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. This is the latest in a series of books that talks about the history of the fire service. Now, a lot of us are kind of reflecting on the history by maintaining collections of the components of the past. For example, if you're an ordinary firefighter, I can probably go into your house and find either some toy fire trucks or a helmet or something such as this speaking trumpet sitting on shelves or in bookcases around your home. Many of us have collected badges, we've collected shoulder patches, etc. And these are the things that make up the past. But the thing I'd like you to think about for just a few seconds is who actually used this speaking trumpet? Who actually wore that fire helmet? Who actually used that fire nozzle that you have in your collection? You see, back here on my shelf, I got some photographs of some firefighters that come out of the 1880s, and they were the ones that actually helped create the past that we now call our history. You know, they had to learn how to do all that stuff. They had to sit down and figure out the ways of getting things accomplished. For example, there's a picture of an early piece of motorized fire apparatus. We didn't just put motorized fire apparatus in the firehouse. We had to write training manuals so that people knew how to operate pumps and how to operate vehicles and so forth. And so what I'm going to talk to you about for the next couple of minutes is not the memorabilia of the fire service. I want to talk about the concepts and the ideas. Here, for example, is a textbook. It's not a history book. This is an original textbook. This particular one, I'm very pleased to have in my collection, is entitled Fire Protection, a complete manual of the organization, machinery, discipline, and general working of the Fire Brigade of London, authored by Chief Officer, Metropolitan Fire Brigade, Ira Massey Shaw, 1876. You see, this is not a history book. This was a book that was printed, it was distributed, and it was utilized by the London Fire Brigade to actually begin to initiate standardized ways of training firefighters. These kinds of documents are just as significant as the history books themselves. It's because the actions taken by individuals is what makes a difference in the past and the present of the fire service. Here's another example of the written word, as it were. I open up this manual and find that this is the journal taken from the tower of Engine Company 46 at 451 East 176th Street in the Bronx of New York, 1882. This is a logbook. It talks about what happened in that firehouse that day. It talks about fire alarms. It talks about going to those fire alarms. It was retrieved from the trash pile by a fellow named Edward Higgins in 1964. It could just as easily have ended up in a landfill somewhere instead of a library. Another example. This one I'm pretty pleased with. I found it in a bookstore many years ago and I paid $1 for it. And what it is The Fundamentals of Firefighting Tactics by Lloyd Lehman, published by the Magruder Publishing Company in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and it is copyrighted of 1940. Now, that was the year I was born. Yet I remember studying out of a revised version of this particular book 20 years later as a young firefighter. Another example. Here's a Fire Guard Instructor's Manual published in 1943, only 3 years after the chief developed his book on tactics and strategy. And as I leaf my way through here, I can see that there is a whole bunch of things that the firefighter of 1943 had to know, but I also notice there's a whole bunch of things that are not in this manual that a modern firefighter has to know. You see, original documents like this are a reflection of change in the fire service. They identify when and where things happened. History books reflect over a chronology of time, whereas original documents talk about actually when it occurred. Periodically, the fire service takes time to slow down long enough to do such a thing as America Burning. Now, you know, the interesting thing about this legacy document is the fact that there are firefighters who have entered the profession, gone through an entire career, and retired, and have never read this book. Moreover, there's some that went through the whole process and never even knew this book existed. And yet, you know what this legacy document does? It identifies the starting and stopping point of many things in our careers, including the creation of the National Fire Academy. I used the word earlier, perishable, and I mean that in a very sincere way. Items are perishable. Here, for example, is a newspaper clipping from probably one of the most well-known days in our current generation, September 11th, 2001. How many of you out there can remember exactly what you were doing that day, that moment? And yet, this is just a piece of paper, and it's high degree of possibility that some of these pieces of paper can be discarded, thrown in the trash, and the written word that followed that particular document disappears forever. Here, for example, is the Chicago Tribune magazine talking about the state of the art with wildland fire crews in the state of Illinois at a certain point in time. These are perishable. They disappear as fast as we toss them in the trash can. So why am I talking about this? What difference does it make to you? Well, it has to do with the fact that we are proposing, and we meaning the American Fire Service, that something be done about it. The United States Fire Administration, which as we all know is a division of FEMA, is studying the feasibility of establishing a National Fire Service Archives, or Heritage Hall, to document the history of our profession. Now you notice I didn't say we're going to document books that have already been written. We're talking about keeping original materials. What we're looking for is reports, organizational minutes, training manuals, pamphlets, magazine articles, photographs, oral history interviews, electronic records that reflect advances in the state of the art of fire services in this particular country. This mission would not include collecting things like fire trucks and toys and things of this nature. We're collecting concepts and ideas. How do you fit into this? Well, if you're like me, you're probably out there collecting this stuff, putting it away. I've got boxes full of material myself. At some point in time, you're going to have to make a decision as to what is going to happen to all that stuff. It's been my personal experience, and I can bear witness to this. I've actually watched several firefighters' collections be sold off at swap meets or garage sales, and I've literally seen original material being hauled to the dump in the back end of a pickup truck. I think that's a tragedy. I think we ought to do something about it. And that's where you come in. It's where all of us come in. What we may start thinking about today is what to do with that material, and one of the answers to that is put it into the Heritage Hall. Now, as this particular project unfolds, it's going to depend on cooperation of people just like you and me. What I would hope that you would do as you collect the stuff is you document it and you refine it and you inventory it and so forth, but that you be prepared at some point to make sure that it ends up somewhere where your legacy is intact. Now, I collect almost daily. My collection's growing by leaps and bounds. I'm sure yours is also. I'd like to wish you well as you continue your collection, but moreover, I'd like you to be thinking about what can your possible contribution be to Heritage Hall. At some point in time, we have to be able to look back on the fire service of today and reflect on what was accomplished today, because there will almost always be somebody who is compiling a history of it, and we are all part of history. See you later.